Hello, thank you for checking this out. This video is looking back at the evolution of my Project B from the first complete version to the current draft. I don't know what year I wrote the first version, but it is, as I said, complete. It is 84 pages. I wrote it in pencil. Don't use pencil to write anything that's important to you because graphite smudges so easily. The premise of the original story was the main character is the king's consort, but becoming the king's consort ended a young romance before it could fully realize itself, and his potential partner left for a decade or so. The main character was what I called a master of ceremony, so he was sort of in a administrative role. He was responsible for, I think it was the operations of the court or the palace, in addition to being the king's consort. Being the consort sort of gave him, in this version, some access and authority that he might not have had necessarily otherwise. There's also the prince and princess. The princess was born first in this fantasy story. The firstborn can inherit, so there's no contention there. But both royal children still have a chip in their shoulder. The son is very aware that he's something of a spare heir, and is also just somewhat insecure, but when in comparison with his older sister. In this original version, the princess is not a warrior, but they do have the equivalent of rangers in this story. She wanted to be a ranger. The romantic potential partner who left became a ranger, I guess. I don't really read through it to remember, but it was something like that. So she sort of has that vicarious interest in with him. And then prince and princess both being of marriageable age, there is an arbitrary cast of sweet and sour characters sort of revolving around them. I wrote this, I finished this, I was proud of it at the time. As I got older, I realized that it's not a very well-developed story. There's no clear sense of the motivation behind most of the characters. The main character was the youngest son of several children from a noble family that is a distinguished line, but over the generations, they no longer have the wealth, and so he came to court poor, but he was apprenticing to the sort of master of ceremonies administrative role. So he had a purpose and he had enjoyment with that and some employ. But in this original version, becoming the king's consort, the power dynamic between them was very clear, and most of that power rested with the king. There was no threat to the king's sense of self or security with this young lover who consented to submit to him initially. A few years after that, I don't know again, but I wrote this version. You can see there's neater handwriting still in pencil. Don't write anything important in pencil. This story did not get as far, but what it introduced was flipping back and forth in time to the decisions that were made when the main character was younger that led to the romantic tragedy of the story proper. This notebook was originally a school notebook, but there are several random scenes, mostly between the main character and the king, that sort of fleshed out a little bit of their dynamic. But most of that dynamic no longer applies. And then this notebook is designated for the just world building stuff. So those random scenes were where this story sat for, I don't know, however long it was. When I was talking about that first version, I didn't mention that the main character also has what I called the sorrow, which is sort of enhanced depression. And if it goes untreated, it can lead to painful manifest, which is essentially depression that kills you. And this is a known phenomenon within that world. So then 4 years ago, I sit down to rewrite that original romantic tragedy, just bringing my theoretically improved skill as a writer to flesh out a little bit more of the characters and the dynamics between them. But I made two major differences, and then the story grew legs and is still carrying me along with it. So instead of the nebulous enhanced depression sorrow, the main character has the equivalent of chronic regional pain syndrome from things that happened, choices that he made, and they don't have that term for it. They don't quite know why he's in pain, but that is informing a lot of this story at this point. And then the other change was he was no longer the youngest child of a distinguished, noble, but very poor family. The family is wealthy and powerful. They are not the rulers, but they are descended from the rulers of the country that the current kingdom evolved out of, or evolved from. So some of the authority of the current king comes from being supported by the main character's family. Those were not the only changes, obviously, but those two changes have had the greatest impact on how this story has developed itself. So I'm something of a woo-woo writer, I guess. I don't follow a structure. I just have the characters, I have the ending that I know they're headed towards, and then I start writing. I will hit a roadblock, and then I will ask the story questions. Literally, on paper, I will start to write out things like, what is the problem here? What is the motivation here? What would lead to this? You know, it depends on what the scene is and what the problem is. That's how I write. So that leads to me stopping working on the draft that I had started working on in here, and then the rest of this notebook is full of world building and character building and the types of questions that I ask of what would lead to this thing. When I was still working on the drafting part in this one, I started using this one for world building notes. It also has a forgotten, rewritten opening scene from the same story, so that is how this notebook got sucked into part of the world building. The other major change was with the princess character. I no longer am using the term princess in the story. I'm using the term heir because she is the heir to the king, and that is the designation for her. She has the same chip in her shoulder. She's not sure she wants this position. In this version, the king is complex. She doesn't quite understand how she can perceive her father as a not good person, but also that he is considered a good king. She ultimately runs away to explore the neighboring realms, and she's not alone. With her goes the romantic potential partner who was like the ranger character from the original version. Once this notebook and the red notebook was filled up, what we have is this notebook. This notebook also is not only Project B. However, what was originally in this notebook is a different fantasy story with a powerful mage character who is still relevant in the timeline of Project B. A lot of what's in here is exploring the early years of friendship between those three characters, and then also the traveling years, essentially. So main character stays at home, is the consort or the king, the heir, and their potential romantic partner knows this, and it's something that they kind of have to deal with, or it's something that's in the background when they're out traveling and having their adventures. So for the heir and the ranger equivalent friend, romantic partner, stymied, they wander for several years and have a decent enough time, but it comes to a pretty bad conclusion. They don't get killed, but it gets pretty close, and then the heir realizes she is pregnant. She's been involved with the king of another realm, and in this fantasy version, because I get to make the rules, it doesn't matter whether or not she has an official partner. What matters is that the child is born within the boundaries of the kingdom. Otherwise, that is what makes the potential heir illegitimate. The main character makes a huge magical, physical sacrifice, essentially, that he kind of expected would kill him, and manages to get her home in time to safely deliver the child in their home kingdom. And then when he isn't dead, that is when he starts to develop the equivalent of CRPS. I don't exactly know when I started to associate this story with The Little Mermaid. It was before I started working on this version of it. I'm guessing it would have to be once I decided that the powerful royal family, or the powerful family, the main character's family, was associated with the sea, that part of their lore is that they have some potential connection to the sea god. And so with the pain of walking, yeah, I think that's where I discovered that connection to the Little Mermaid story, the original version. So the potential for this story has carried me along this far. So that was 4 years ago in here that I picked the story back up, and I seriously started exploring what it took for this world to exist. This one exploring both the past, but also is where I asked, how can this story be different? And it led me to, if these characters made different choices, then the story doesn't happen in the way that I envision it at this point. So I went from in September trying to rewrite this romantic tragedy, thinking it would take me a couple of weeks, ending up with 4 notebooks of world building. We get to NaNoWriMo of that year, and this is purely a draft that is more draft than how far I got when I first sat down to write it. And at the point that I was working on this version, I thought I was going to keep the entire story in only the main character's perspective, but as the world got bigger and more complex, that will not work to deliver the story. There's more going on than just the romantic tragedy. There's more going on than just the interest in potential suitors. There is also now the encroaching enemy from another part of the continent, making its way relentlessly to the sheltered shore. I don't remember specifically what sort of disrupted or distracted me from getting further from working on this version of the draft, but a couple years go by. So we start again with this one. And we made it only this far. I typed up the pages that I had written in here and then didn't get any further. But when I came back to it this time around and I reread these opening pages, I did not feel the need to rewrite this and start over again. And so we have picked up from here, and the way I was able to pick up from there was by changing the point of view to a different character. Not the heir, not the ranger friend, not the king, but a interested suitor of the prince, the younger son. So that new POV character, Heir, I realized when I was thinking about her and thinking about talking about her in this video, that characters like her, where I need a name, I need a person, they become the fruiting body, like a mold, like a fungus, like a mushroom, becomes the fruiting body of the mycorrhizal network through my brain. I have this character, I have this name, they say these things. From there, why would they do any of that? Why would any of that be so? And that builds out everything behind them, pulling up from the subterranean network connected to the sargasso of my subconscious. So we're moving forward. This is where we are at this point. These other 2 notebooks that I held up in the thumbnail of my AuthorTube newbie video are different times that over the last year I was trying to restart the story and I was struggling with it. This was before I had fully switched to other characters' POV, but I had started to realize it. This version has what would be the start of book 2, but it doesn't go further than the opening scene. And this version, I was like, let's try and come at this story from a completely different place. Not book 1, not book 2, but like halfway through book 2 with a completely different POV character. I learned some things about the world building, but I don't perceive myself going in that direction. For right now, this is book 2, this is book 3, but not really. Why does it have book 2 and book 3? Well, I didn't originally set out for it to be book 1, book 2, book 3. It is just this contained romantic tragedy. I know my beginning event, I know the events in the middle, I know the ending event, but as these legs have kept growing and this world has kept growing, it's filling in the spaces. I finished project A, which gave me a concrete idea of what such and such number of words, such and such number of pages looks like. And fantasy stories, debut authors, Googling it, whatever else, doesn't look like it's going to be easy to publish a book that is over 120,000 words. Over 120,000 words. I found a sort of climactic cliffhanger point that is in the somewhat middle of the events, depending on how I write it, and that is the breaking point between book 1 and book 2. And then book 3 is a few years down the line, some of the fallout and consequences of the actions in the first 2 books, and also the decisions that come from before the first book. And then the only other thing is I have a sketchbook for maps and things. I don't draw very well, but it's a reference point, so I know where the other realms and countries are when the characters are talking about them, or where the heir and the ranger friend had gone before, or such as other places that the various suitor characters have come from. I think that's probably it, unless, without going any further into the particulars of the story, that is how I got from an 80-page romantic tragedy where depression was the main problem to a probably trilogy, stupidly extensive, complicated political story that also has a romantic tragedy going on. So I think I will close this out reading a couple of pages from the current draft that are in the POV of the side character who helped me unlock this current iteration of this beloved project. The side character has just ridden up alongside the main character. Both of them are on horses, and they are along a rocky beach. Lord Dragos' surprised frown deepened as he looked at her face. Lady Hetriida? Lord Dragos, she dipped her head respectfully and gave a small smile. I would like to account for what blew down the door. I was with Modest. That old barman should not be giving any mistruth. No. The sharp rejection startled both of them, and Lord Dragos glanced aside for a moment. I intend no rudeness. If it were truly a matter of the broken door, your account may be welcome, but it is only Prince Maris who can answer to the king. Will you allow me to return with you even so? I wish to admire your mare. She bowed her head a second time, shifting her gaze to meet the large black eye the silver horse fixed on her and Goldjoy. I thought I knew all the horses of the palace stables, but I have never seen your azure-eye beauty. Lord Dragos studied her face with an inscrutable blue gaze, then loosed a light sigh and plucked once at the fine leather braid around the base of his mare's neck. She gave a softer blow than before, shaking her head but turning as well. Hetriida guided Goldjoy nearly beside them, keeping to the slightly lower slope of the beach. Her name is Blaze, he told her. She sleeps in the gilded stable and spends most of her days running the pasture now. We have shimmer horses in Lumena. The breeders tell us they are descended by azure-eye horses, but they do not gleam as Blaze is. How did she come to you? When Lord Dragos did not answer swiftly, his face and gaze turned forward, warmth climbed Hetriida's neck and cheeks. I heard that the Azurine do not trade their horses with low coin or light heart, a mare more so. He nodded slightly and still did not speak. Hetriida did not ask more, turning her face to the cooling gust from the east, the distant wave foam as bright white as snow before smashing blue-gray over slick mud and loose gravel. Lord Dragos made a short hum and then finally answered. Maya's ships are built and delivered to the Azure-eye to hold their coast against the Braithed. Hetriida shuddered and instinctively made a circle with her thumb and first finger, bringing it to her forehead to close into a fist before reclasping Goldjoy's rein. Lord Dragos looked curious, but at least not incredulous as Modest and Saban had done. You warred against the name? We do not want to bring them to Lumena. Her voice was small in her throat despite her effort, not even to invite them to our thoughts. I know, it is foolish. Saban tells me there is no mind magic that can reach so far, and that making a sign against their evil is as useful as picking my nose to stop them. He turned his full gaze to her, and she smiled to disarm Saban's second-hand insult. For all he may be right, I'd rather be wrong and ward my mind anyway. In any case, it cannot hurt. His gaze drifted to the surf beyond her as he said, The Maya ships earned my brother some favor. Her name is Blaze because once, as she ran, she struck flint and ignited dry grass. Not a big fire, just enough to scare and anger herself. The slow unfurling of his smile was for the memory Hetriida knew, yet it altered his features completely, from a sculptor's refined mask to a face lifted by love and a sun-glow. We helped to bring her back in from that. I was permitted to ride her, she allowed it, and I fell quite in love. Hetriida chuckled softly, and Lord Dragos gave a small, helpless shrug, his smile fading, while the lightness in his face remained. My brother was only able to buy her because she had injured stallions and killed 2 by then. She did not like the sea voyage home to Maya's, but she didn't stomp me for it. Thank you for listening. That's a little sample of the current draft. Who knows if it will make it into the final version, but it has definitely opened some avenues for me nevertheless. I very much thank you for this time. This video is not easy to make. It's very vulnerable to share your writing, especially when you've been working on the same project and restarting the same project for more than a couple of years. I think the only thing that's different between this time and the previous times is I was always working on it just for the enjoyment and for me, I guess. But then now it feels like there is a story that already exists, and it will exist whether I finish writing it or not, but it won't leave me alone until I do finish. So that's where I'm at. I thank you for your time, and I'll see you with the next video.